Okay, we now arrive at the last chapter of the book, called Esther, from concubine to queen. And we're going to meet here an amazing heroine. I mean, it's a really rags to riches story. It's kind of the Cinderella of the Bible. And and we're going to see how she moves. This is of course, my obsession here in this book is to observe what are the power moves that women make in order to move from a situation of darkness to a situation of light, from a situation of captivity to a situation of liberation, redemption. So we have here the perfect heroine for this uh, journey, trajectory that I've been exploring throughout the book. So we are now moving in a very different context. Up until now, we had writings in the context of the land of Israel, right? You had, of course, the creation of woman. We had Book of Job, but then Book of Esther, King Solomon's trilogy, and now we move into the exilic people of Israel. This is after the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and now many Israelites, actually most of them, for sure the elites, have been exiled to Babylon. And we have a story, right? The story is told vividly in the book of Daniel, which we'll refer to. There's some connections here between this book and the book of Daniel. And so now we are several years into this captivity in Babylon. The Jews have integrated, the Jews have assimilated. And we meet, of course, our heroine. She's a Jew, a Babylonian Jew. And we're going to explore her story, how she moves from being a penniless orphan to the queen of the land. So that's the context. We are now in Babylon. We are now studying a Jewish character still, but in the Babylonian court this time. And of course, my interest, of course, is to see how this young orphan who was penniless, who had nothing, ended up, of course, we're going to see that her story is pretty tragic. She's living with her uncle. She's kidnapped during a raid to become a concubine of the king. And eventually, and this is what we're going to explore, how she does it, but eventually she rises to become the queen of the land, but not just, a kind of, this is not just like a honorary title. She's actually ruling, writing decrees, shifting the course of history alongside her king. So this is really, she ends up in a situation of unparalleled equality with a pagan king who is anything but refined and, you know, compassionate. He is compassionate, but he's quite uncouth. He's quite rough and barbaric, and yet she succeeds in moving his heart, finding favor with him, and becoming an equal partner in the and reigning alongside him. So I am, of course, very interested to see because, of course, this is a story for many of us, right? To the degree that we end up with partners that are barbaric. What can we do in order to, we end up in relationships where we are, um, not heard, not listened to. How do we rise like Queen Esther? That's my question while remaining in such a relationship. What are the steps we can take, the positioning we can make in order to rise as Queen Esther did? We're going to see, by the way, that she rises and to the point of resembling one of the very famous goddesses of Babylon, Ishtar. The author of this story paints Esther, Queen Esther, when she reaches the state of a queen, the author paints her with the traits of the goddess Ishtar. So we are here still in the sacred marriage context, but with a Hebrew twist. We're still in the context of remember, this is all the same ancient Near Eastern context where you have a goddess to whom the king needs to connect in order to rule wisely. We have Queen Esther taking on little by little, progressively, the traits of the goddess Ishtar and becoming that feminine figure of wisdom. And to the degree that the king knows to connect to her, everything changes in the land, from chaos to order, from destruction to redemption. So there is an intention here of the author to kind of um, move her into that position of the goddess, which is supposed to empower the king, as we saw, of course, with the story of Inanna and Dumuzi. So let's begin our story. There's going to be 4 moments in our story. We're going to first look at the failed marriage between Vashti and the king. So this is the king's first wife. Then we're going to look at the kidnapping of Esther and life in the harem. Then we will look at the moment where she steps into her role as a queen. What are the stakes? How does she do it? And we will look finally at the seduction of the king. So this is our trajectory. These are the different stages in the life of Esther. Okay, let's begin with this first marriage. So the book opens on, we're told a little bit about Esther. She's, an orphan. She's welcomed by her uncle, and they're living their lives as assimilated Babylonian Jews. On the other hand, you have the king living his life with a queen called Vashti. And it's interesting because Vashti is quickly going to be moved out of the picture so that Esther can step in. But Vashti is actually quite beloved in the Jewish tradition. The rabbis actually really admire Vashti, and we're going to see why. So she's not just a minor character. She's quite a powerful figure, a precursor, I believe, of the feminist movement that we, of course, are attuned to nowadays. But she's in a way the first feminist of the Bible. So we're going to look at that. And the rabbis really praise her for that. So let's look a little bit at this marriage. So in the beginning, you have there's not any words about the marriage, but it is subtle. The story subtly tells us the state of this couple's love, in that the king organizes a big banquet. He's probably newly appointed. He wants to make an impression. And by the way, just a side note, that the true royalty here, by the way, is not the king, is Vashti, his wife. Royalty was transmitted through the woman, not through the man. So often a man could become king, of course, by being birthed by a queen or by marrying a princess. And we are in the context here of a man who is quite primitive in his behavior. He's not a refined man. He's not a courtly man. He's not of royal blood. And he has married, however, into royalty, because Vashti is really in the line of royalty. So we have this young king who has just arrived on the scene. He's not of royal blood, so so there's an element of insecurity. So of course he has to make an impression. So he organizes this huge banquet, 6-month-long banquet, and to invite all of the ministers of his kingdom. And of course, the kingdom of Babylon was extremely vast. It's a world kingdom that Babylon had conquered throughout the ancient Near East. It was was a powerful empire, as powerful as Rome, so we have this king inviting all of the ministers to this huge banquet. And then you have several details. So the king organizes this banquet, and then the queen decides, I'm going to have my own banquet for the women. So just this detail tells us something. We don't have here a cooperation between the genders. We have the king here, the queen here. We begin the story not with a union, not with communion between male and female, but with a rift. The story begins with a rift between the man and the woman. And it is from this rift that we're going to see what is causing the rift, but also what the rift leads to. And of course, the rift, remember when we saw this at the beginning, when you don't have a strong union between the king and the female principal, you have a kingdom ruled by injustice, by oppression, and chaos ensues. So in the ancient Near East, the king has to remain connected to the feminine principle. He cannot rule alone. He has to be in an intimate connection with the feminine, receptive to the feminine, eager to listen to the voice of the woman. Here we have none of that. We have a separation. We have a silence, no communication. And of course, the result is excess. And we're going to see this in the way the banquet is described. We have a passage here, Esther chapter 1, verse 8. We have the rules of drinking. The king prescribes that there should be no restriction on the drinking. And then continuing, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes with no restrictions. So we are here in the context of limitless male desire, limitless male agency. This is a very dangerous place for women, of course. And perhaps this is why also Queen Vashti organizes a separate banquet for the woman, because a space where man's desires, agency is limitless is a very dangerous place indeed for the woman. So you have really, immediately you see that the man is center stage. There are no restrictions to his desire, and therefore no room for another agency, for another voice, for another subject. In such a context, there is no room for the woman. And this is why, of course, the kingdom is going to fall very quickly. We're going to see into chaos and destruction. Because without the female principle, this is an ancient Near Eastern principle. Without the without the connection with the female, the king inevitably falls into behaviors of oppression, of being the center, and of course, chaos, destruction ensues. So, in the midst of this, space of no restriction of placed on male desire, the king decides he wants to show off his wife, who is of course of royal blood. So therefore, this is not something you do to a queen. When you bring, I mean, basically, we have to understand what he's doing here. He's bringing her to the level of a prostitute, because you bring the prostitutes. That's the verb that's used here, right? He tells his servants to bring the queen, Esther 1:11. You don't bring the queen. You bring prostitutes, you bring female dancers, you bring concubines, that you bring. But when the text says he orders his servants to bring the queen, he's lowering her to the level of a prostitute. Which normally, of course, the prostitutes were there to dance, to be beautiful, to make an impression. He's now making her do that. And of course, the queen, being of royal blood, refuses. And this is where the rabbis praise her, right? They're like, yes, this woman knows who she is. She will not allow herself to be degraded and demeaned. And indeed, they praise her. But of course, the king obviously resents this. It's a public humiliation. She has stood up for herself. She refuses, point blank, no discussion, no apology, no nothing, just refuses. And he is, of course, completely humiliated. He calls his advisors. We need to deal with this quickly, otherwise every woman will follow suit, right? We have here the awakening of the woman's agency, the awakening of the woman's voice. We are in the context of the feminist battle for female agency, for respect, for equality. This is where we are. This is the first feminist, right? But of course, the king immediately crushes this uprising of women by chasing Vashti out of the court. And of course, now the king is alone. And, he's few months go by, the story tells us, and after a while, this is a beautiful moment. This is where the king becomes, in spite of all of his barbaric ways and his lack of refinement and his, toxic masculine self, the king has a moment here that is very moving. The text says the king missed Vashti. I read, sometime afterward, when the anger had subsided, the anger of the king had subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed. And so, in other words, at that moment, he begins to miss her. So we begin to see that this king is not as, I mean, he is barbaric, he is uncouth, he is unrefined, but at the same time, this king has heart. There is an element here of affection. The king misses Esther. He's capable of emotion, feelings. He's capable of regret. So we're going to see that in that sense, you can still work with this king. There's still something, and it's true. And I think, there's something beautiful here in the story, which shows us that, you know, we tend to sometimes demonize this kind of men as the king here, who are, barbaric, self-narcissistic, and so forth. And we kind of strike them with the judgment that, if you're a narcissistic person and you don't have a sense of the other, that's like there's nothing that can be done with you. There's no hope for you. And there's all, if you go online, there's everything, all kinds of advice on how to detect a narcissist, and then how there's absolutely no dialogue possible, and this is, you have to, there's only one thing to do with such a man: you have to leave him, right? So the story acknowledges the king is a narcissist. There's a wide description of this, but at the same time, in this moment where the king misses Vashti, there is a glimmer of hope, not really for Vashti, but for the king. And we're going to see that Esther is going to very skillfully work her way, or find her path to the king's heart in a way that will deeply transform this king. So there is hope for the narcissist. This is kind of what the story might be telling us. In any case, the advisors of the king decide, well, all right, well, let's get you a new woman. And that is when they organize this kind of beauty pageant. That's a very mild word for what actually happened. Basically, what they did, they went throughout the kingdom and kidnapped some of the most beautiful maidens to bring to the king. So we have to, right, the story is very subtle and discreet about the violence that occurred here. But we see this in the description of the treatment of the women. So these women are abducted, brought into the king's harem, and Esther, of course, is abducted along with these women and finds herself there. So life in the harem, going now to our second section, life in the harem, at first glance, seems amazing, right? The women are given, they're well taken care of, and that's true. They're given special foods, maids, beauty treatments, perfumed oil. They're given gifts of perfumed oil, cosmetics. I mean, this is a dream. So it's a beauty queen's dream. And so it seems like everything is perfect and beautiful, but what we're losing here when we just read superficially the text is the way that this treatment is not just about beautifying the women and preparing them for the king. It's also a form of erasure. There is the desire to erase that woman's prior identity. And you can see this in the way that they want to oil that woman, to scrub that woman clean of everything that pertains to her past. There's a parallel between this moment in the story and the abduction of Daniel. And it's very illuminating to read the two texts together because it's the same thing. Daniel is also given special foods. Daniel is also, his body is also affected, right? In the context of Babylon, the captives, the nobles who were brought and made into officials of the king, often were castrated. So you have, while Esther is being scrubbed clean, Daniel perhaps is being castrated. So you have the impact on the body, you have the element of the food, the special foods in both stories. And then, of course, in the context of Daniel, you also have the conformation of the mind to the Chaldean, to the Babylonian arts, science, and so forth, right? So you have in both stories the desire to take over the agency, the identity, to erase it, and to make that person into the perfect citizen, the perfect official, the perfect butt for the king. So we definitely have here a very painful moment here for Queen Esther, where not only is she abducted from the man she loves, Mordechai, her uncle, but also every attempt is made to erase who she used to be and to shape her into this perfect playmate for the king, right? So It's interesting that unlike Daniel, who chooses to protect his identity and who asks for special favors so that he can still eat kosher and so forth, Esther completely surrenders. It's a very different approach. She completely yields in a way that's almost, you can sense almost, she has given up at this point. Esther has given up. She has completely, she's lost all the fight in her. She's not even going to try to survive and protect anything. She just yields completely, becomes completely passive. And this is very symptomatic of somebody who is in a situation of sexual violence, right? At one point, you just completely surrender passively to the experience because there's nothing you can do. And if you do anything, you might die. So this is a survival tactic where she just surrenders, yields, doesn't ask for anything, doesn't impose, right? It's very interesting because Daniel asks, and here you have the opposite in Esther 2:15, when Esther is about to enter and meet and encounter the king and be his lover for the night. It says this: Esther did not ask for anything but what Haggai, guardian of the women, advised. So you have very opposite reactions to the captivity. Daniel decides to resist, Esther decides to yield. And I mean, it has its charm, right? Because Esther, in the end, somehow it wins the king's favor. So there's definitely, and there's definitely beauty here in the way that she, in a way, accepts her fate and knows to align and go with the flow. There's really wisdom here. We're going to see it's not enough, of course, right? But there is here. I just want to stop here for just a second and talk about a little bit about the wisdom of yielding. It's interesting because as feminists, we're all now feminists nowadays. We have been taught, you must, we are in control of our bodies, of our agency. We have to stand up for ourselves. We have to, really defend ourselves and so forth. We need to also be heard, and which this is absolutely obvious, right? But what we're often not taught as women nowadays is the beauty of learning to yield, not for important things, but small things, right? Learning to put oneself aside for the sake of the happiness of the other person. There's such beauty in that gesture. And it's so hard for some of us, right? We want the man to treat us as princesses, to cater to all of our desires. And we don't realize that there is also beauty in putting oneself aside for the other and yielding to the other in the daily things of life, right? So this is a very different definition of beauty than we have nowadays. And we're going to see, of course, that even for the biblical text, it's not enough to be a yielding. But what Esther is going to discover is that only a woman who shows herself capable of yielding to the man she loves, only such a woman will in turn be yielded to by her lover. To the degree that we learn to yield and surrender and put the other first in the small things of life is the degree that when the time arrives that is important and crucial, this inspires the man in turn to yield to us. Not always, huh? Not always. But it can also inspire the man to also offer himself in this way. It's what Esther is going to discover that is that only the woman capable of surrendering to her lover can in turn be surrendered to. Now, it's not enough for her to stay in this state to inspire her lover's generosity, but for sure it sets the ground for it. A woman who is demanding, expecting, constantly nagging is never going to get anything. There's beauty here in learning to yield and surrender occasionally to one's lover. It's not enough, but it's the terrain that will be needed when the time comes for her requests to be heard. So just wanted to say a few words about that. It's very countercultural, but it is really part of Esther's soft power here. So everything would have been good. So eventually, by the way, she seduces the king. Of course, he finds this yielding to be irresistible. She becomes the queen. And then she kind of sinks into oblivion, right? She's just kind of she's an asset, really. She's like a, what do you call that when you have like a handbag? Yeah, she becomes a kind of asset. She's just there to make the king look good. Um, and then kind of you don't hear about her for a while. Meanwhile, because the land is still ruled by a narcissistic king who is still, in charge of everything. I mean, Esther hasn't changed that in the king. She's herself yielding to him, so she's really enabling this. Because the kingdom is still ruled by, this kind of narcissistic figure, chaos is about to ensue. And indeed, the king allows himself to be convinced by one of his advisors, Haman, to destroy all the Jews of the kingdom. Haman had some kind of squabble with a Jew, and then he decides, out of his rage, to destroy the whole Jewish population. He manages to convince the king, who is himself very insecure. We know why. And the king decides, decrees, all right, no problem. Yeah, why not? Right? Not knowing, of course, that his wife is Jewish, because Esther, the queen of yield, is not going to say anything or nothing, right? So at this point, the uncle of Esther contacts the queen, contacts Esther and tells her, you have to do something. You are the king, you are the queen. Surely there is something you can do. And Esther immediately tells him no and says, what do you mean? I'm not more than a concubine around here. In fact, the king hasn't even called for me, hasn't even brought me for the last 30 days. Now, we have to measure the crisis here. Because if she hasn't been brought to the king in 30 days, what does this mean? It means that the king has already replaced her with some beautiful face or some pretty concubine. He's not even talking, she's not even in the picture anymore. She's about to sink into total oblivion. And she's saying, I don't have any power here. What do you think? I have power? I'm myself a victim. That is what she's telling her uncle. I'm a victim here. I don't have any say or power. What do you mean? And her uncle says, figure it out. You have to do something. And at that moment, at this moment of crisis, Esther has a choice. She can either continue to live as a concubine, as a victim, to be silent, to say nothing, to yield, to surrender, to be passive. She can continue that. But if she does, the consequences will be dire for her family, for her city, for her kingdom, right? To the degree that the woman doesn't know her true place, which is to be the equal of the man, which is to be the wisdom of the man, to the degree that the woman in a way doesn't realize this and continues to accept and resign herself to being nothing, we are in trouble. So Esther has a choice to remain a victim, or she has a choice to rise and to become the queen she was meant to be, and to become the embodiment of woman wisdom, and to rise to the level of the goddess Ishtar, in other words, to rise to the level of the consort of the king, the true consort of the king, the consort which gives the king his true authority, which enables him to rule justly. So she has this choice. And it's not easy for Esther, because remember, that's not her personality. Esther is not used to, making big deals and clamoring her rights. Esther is used to yielding. She's used to being passive, going with the flow. This is something that is in a way going to force her to move way beyond her comfort zone. But if she doesn't do it, so much is at stake. And so let's look a little bit at how Esther maneuvers here. The first thing that Esther does is she calls a 3-day fast. And so this is very interesting, because the number 3 is very important, not just biblically. Of course, you have the number 3 being important, especially in the New Testament, also in the Hebrew Bible. You have the number 3 in the story of Jonah, right? But especially in the ancient Near East, the number 3 is very important, especially when it comes to the goddess Ishtar. There's a story, of course, very well known, certainly to the writer of this story, of the goddess Ishtar deciding that she doesn't want to just be the queen of heaven. She wants to be the queen of heaven and of the underworld, not just right ruling the heavens, but also the underworld. And so she decides to go and enter the underworld and see if she can conquer that realm. And the story talks about her descending into the underworld. And each step that she takes as she's descending, she has to strip something off of herself, her coat, her robe, her jewelry, until she's left with nothing. And there she enters the underworld naked and faces the queen of the underworld, who has absolutely no mercy and no understanding of what is happening, and basically kills her and hangs her on a hook, her corpse. And she spends 3 days in this state, in this morbid state of being a corpse, until she's rescued by some minor spiritual entities. And then she emerges out of the underworld, extremely powerful. She emerges now not only queen of heaven, but also the queen of the underworld. So it's a very interesting myth, actually, to explore in general. But basically, it's the idea that you can't emerge in your power, in your full power, as a woman or as a goddess or whatever, until you have learned to strip yourself of everything, until you have entered the moment of your death, until you have risked it all. This is basically the meaning of that ancient Near Eastern myth, that to resurrect as a higher version of yourself, you have to die. You have to risk death. You have to lose the old self, to shed the old self. And this is really what is happening during those 3 days that Esther is fasting. Of course, this is a biblical connotation also of prayer and so forth. But you also have this notion of there's a metamorphosis going on. She's transforming. She's shedding the old Esther, the passive, surrendered, yielding Esther, and we will see that she rises out of these 3 days a queen, somebody who's ready to risk it all, because it is to the degree that she's ready to risk it all that she steps into her queenly role. Before, if you're not ready to risk it all, you always remain a concubine. It is to the degree that a woman is ready to take this courageous step of facing her man, of perhaps risking the relationship, perhaps risking the love, risking certainly the comfort zone and the status quo. There is that she will enter into her queendom. So she arises out of these 3 days where she has shed her old self and died to herself to a certain degree. She's ready now to die to her old self. And the text tells us, chapter 5, verse 1, she puts on her royal robes. And remember, in the ancient Near East, remember this trope of the woman bathing, anointing, and wearing, putting on new clothing. This is the moment we know from the ancient Near East, this signifies the transition of the woman from maiden to queen, right? We saw this with Inanna, we saw this with Ruth, and now we're seeing it again with Esther. She's moving now. She's shedding the maiden, the subservient, yielding maiden, and entering into her new identity as a queen. And so, having put on her royal robes, she now moves and walks and directs herself towards the king. She goes to his throne room. And it's interesting because in the Hebrew, so the translation says that she approaches the king, Esther 5:2. But the Hebrew is very interesting there. The verb that is used, and any old verb could have been used, but it's a verb, very specific verb, and the verb in Hebrew is karav. Now, this verb is semantically connected to the Hebrew noun korban, sacrifice. So we are here, so the author is intentionally using language from the book of Leviticus, sacrificial language, to describe what Queen Esther is doing right now. Queen Esther, in a sense, is offering herself in sacrifice. She's risking it all. She's ready to face, no matter what the consequences are, she's ready to stand up for her people, for herself, and say what she has to say. So it's there's a powerful moment here that I want to stop on a little bit and talk about when it comes to us as women. Too often we fall into relationships where we're getting by. So we're able to survive. It's not ideal. We're surviving, but at the same time, we're afraid if we say anything to even lose the little that we have, right? So there are many women out there who are in less than ideal relationships and who are on survival mode all day long and who think that, well, if I say anything, he's not going to listen. Or if I say anything, it might make him worse. He might begin to become a worse version of himself. I'm afraid of the violence. I'm afraid that he might leave me. I'm afraid of the consequences of facing the situation. And so what we're learning here from Queen Esther is that there can be no transformation without this risk, without this huge risk of shedding the old self, facing the situation, speaking up, which is a risk. You might lose everything. You might lose the artificial peace you have created. You might lose that. But this is the price of transformation. And too often we are so scared and we are so resigned that we never take that step. And because we never take that step, that risky step, that sacrificial step of standing up for ourselves, of putting on a new version of ourselves, which is courageous and speaking up, we never truly achieve the transformation that we could achieve. To achieve that transformation, we have to have the courage to continuously face the situation and to continuously believe that something can be done, that something can change, that things can get better. This faith that speaking up will help is something that is so hard to do because it implies that your heart is still open. It implies that you still have some love and hope in the relationship. And too often we have buried this. What Queen Esther is teaching us is how risky it is to keep hoping. That's what Esther is doing by facing the king. She's doing this with the hope that something can be done. And this hope is so expensive. It takes so much out of us to hope because this hope might be shattered. So we have this here with Esther, this courage. And now, of course, we enter into how she actually speaks to him. So it's not enough to hope and to, gather the courage to speak. One has to now learn how to speak in a way that we can be heard. And this is here where Queen Esther is at her best. So let's look a little bit what she does. So it's interesting that as Queen Esther enters the court, the story tells us immediately she wins the king's favor. So this is unexpected. Of course, the king is somebody who we know already has a good heart, even though he's barbaric. So he's seduced by this woman who is showing up here in the court. And what you guys don't know yet is that this was actually forbidden. Nobody could enter the court of the king without being invited, on the pain of death. So when Esther is doing this, she's risking death. Yes, this is a detail I forgot to say. So, and it's interesting because the king forgets all about this. When he sees her, he melts and he's like, what do you want? Up to half of my kingdom I will give you. So you can see here the kind of generosity. The king, has a generous heart. This is to his credit. And so it's interesting because this is the first time that the king is saying or doing something which is not selfish. Up until now, this king has been doing only what he wants for himself. This is the first time we see the king showing generosity. And so I want to stop on this because it is something that Esther did that which made that shift. And I want to really encourage us also because there is here a trajectory that we can follow. It's interesting that the king didn't become generous when Esther was yielding, right? When she first found favor there's two moments where Esther finds favor with the king. The first one is when she spends the night with him for the first time as a concubine, and he makes her queen. The text says she found favor with him. This is the second time, but this time something shifts in the king's psychology. Rather than just taking her as a queen, he offers himself to her. There's a gesture here of generosity. I want to give you something. I don't just want to take you for myself. I want to offer you something, half of my kingdom. So there's something here that is different. Esther won the favor of the king the first time by yielding and surrendering to the king. Now she is winning his favor by showing initiative, by showing her, by opening her heart and revealing to the king her desires. So this is so powerful that in fact the king is shifted not when a woman yields, not when his woman yielded, but when she, on the contrary, challenged him, asked something of him that, or at least is attempting to ask something of him that he wasn't giving her. So we have here a shift. The erotic power here of Esther lies not here in fulfilling the king's fantasies, but in her ability to express to him the desires of her heart. We don't understand how powerful it is when a woman is vulnerable and expresses what she longs for. And of course, there's a way to do it, but just that. Too often as women, we fall into, well, he doesn't care, and anyways, he's not going to do it, and anyways, he doesn't hear me when I talk. But there is beauty in being vulnerable, and there's power in being vulnerable. And Esther here is teaching us that, because ultimately, what awakens love in a man's heart is not us doing and yielding for him. It is in fact us inspiring him to become a better version of himself. This is what makes a man fall in love, right? A man can be seduced, attracted by a beautiful, yielding woman anytime. But a woman who inspires or elevates him to be more, to give more, is truly the woman he will fall in love with, because this woman is in a way elevating him. Right. So when a woman reveals her desires and when she reveals, what she longs for, when she offers a vision of what could be, of what the king could offer, there's so much power there, in the sense that now she's not just yielding to him and doing what he wants. She's inspiring him to rise to become a higher version of himself. And that is why Queen Esther here is making such a deep impression. The king, by seeing her trust and her vulnerability, realizes, oh, she basically awakens in him the urge to be generous just by showing up and being vulnerable with her desires. And I just want to emphasize, right, there is so much power in being vulnerable about our desires. First of all, connecting to our desires, but also offering those desires in a trusting way. This, in a way, inspires the generosity of our kings. So here we are seeing here this beautiful gesture by Esther, and the way and how much it awakens in the king. But of course, there's a way to do this. So let's see a little bit how she's going to formulate her desire, because this is very, very insightful. Okay, there's three moments here that I want to highlight as she begins to speak to the king and what she says. The first moment I want to highlight is the very strange fact, that she doesn't just invite the king. And remember, this is a private invitation into her bedchambers, into her very intimate space. She's inviting the king to a banquet. And hopefully she's hoping perhaps during the banquet, And the night that ensues, she'll be able to, tell him what is on her heart. But she doesn't just invite the king. She invites her arch enemy, Haman, the very man who devised the genocide of the Jews in Babylon. So that struck me as a really strange detail when I first read it. And I was thinking about it and I was like, why would she invite Haman? What is she doing? What is her strategy? And it dawned on me that perhaps there's meaning here deeper than just the actual historical fact. What Esther is actually doing when she's inviting Haman along with the king is inviting both the king's generosity and the one who represents the king's cruelty. In other words, Haman is simply an extension of the king. Haman is the dark side of the king. You have the king who is generous, who is loving, but then there's a darker side to this king. And Haman, in a way, embodies the king's vilest, most cruel impulses. Right? Haman is just the extension of this already cruelty that is lodged within the king. So when she's inviting the cruelty with the generosity together in her intimate space, what she's actually saying is that she's in a way welcoming the king, all of him. She's not just going to address or welcome the generous part of the king and his generosity. She's also going to welcome the king and his violence, the king and his cruelty. She's basically saying here that she's capable of welcoming the king, all of the king onto herself. His generous, his tender, his loyal side, but also his cruel, his barbaric, his sadistic side. By inviting both of them, she's showing a stunning acceptance of the king in all his complexity. She shows that she loves all of him, his spirit and his flesh, his strength and his weakness, his light and his darkness. There is such power in being capable of not only knowing our man in all of his complexity, but accepting it. Too often, right, we date someone, we marry them for their goodness, and one day there's a situation where we see also their pettiness. We see their darkness. This is the moment in every relationship where a woman will realize that it's not just love here that is jeopardized, it's respect. She is here at this moment. This is the moment where a woman loses respect of her man. When she sees that man being this, acting like this, that she never would have expected. This is the moment where the woman will lose respect. And this is also the moment where the woman will realize, well, I cannot stay with such a man who is like this. These are all the red flags. This is all the things he's doing. How can I accept to be with such a man? This is the moment where the woman will dump that man. What Esther is doing, which is so beautiful, is that she has seen all of the king. She has seen his ugliness and his beauty. She has seen his violence and his generosity. And yet she's capable of saying, you know what? I'm going to stay. I'm not going to reject you now that I have truly seen you. There's such power in this, in being capable of seeing a man in all his complexity and realizing I still accept you and I still welcome you in all of your complexity. I'm not afraid of your darkness. I'm not afraid of your demons. I welcome them all. And I am in a way going to embrace all of you, not just a part of you. And this is the beautiful gesture that Esther is doing this, which is very, very powerful. The first step in any transformation in the couple is this radical, first of all, lucidity of who the man is that you're with, but also radical acceptance. I am not going to abandon you now that I have truly seen you. That's what Esther is saying here. Now that I truly see you, all of you, I am choosing to stay and to remain with you and not to abandon you or reject you. So this is the first step for transformation, is the ability to do that. The ability to see the problem, to be lucid about the problem, but also the ability to embrace the person, all of them. So that's the first step. The second step is the way that she is going to make her request known to the king. And again, just like Ruth, we have here a lot of wisdom in the way that she chooses to approach the king. Let's remember that the king has just done something very stupid, right? He has just randomly jeopardized the whole population of which Esther is a part. I mean, Esther has every right to march to the king and to be like, are you stupid? Like, why would you do this? I'm your wife and I'm Jewish, right? No, she, in a way, she chooses the path of humility. Now, it's the combination of these two things. Esther is, on the one hand, incredibly audacious, incredibly courageous. She's challenging the king's edict, which you never do. King's edict is final. You don't challenge the king's decrees, right? So there's an immense here audacity, but at the same time, she knows to balance it with incredible, poignant humility. And the text shows us this. There are 6 words of supplication by which she expresses her desire. She begins, there's the word to wish, to request, favor, if it please. Again, wish, request. So she's in a way, the key here lies in the judicious balance between humility and audacity, between courage and courtesy. It's not, as you see, the problem with many of us women is we're either courageous and audacious, but we don't have humility, or we're humble and victim and we don't have courage. Nothing can happen as long as we're just humble or as long as we're just courageous. The key is to blend the two. This is, remember when Eve was created and God said, you're his ezer kenegdo, kenegdo. Remember we talked about ke being like and negdo being against. Esther is embodying this principle right now. She's both with the king. She invites all of him. She is humble. But at the same time, there's a brazenness, there is a courage, there is a chutzpah here where she is in a way challenging the king's decree, which is never supposed to be challenged, which is final. So that's what I want to highlight, right? Her humility, the tone that she uses. The content is challenging. The content is confrontational, but the tone is humble. This is another moment of incredible astuteness on the part of Esther. And then the last thing she does, which I find, which is extremely powerful, she confronts the king, but blames Haman. Now, this is interesting. I want to stop on that because this is very interesting. Basically, what she's saying to the king when she blames Haman, I mean, it's the king who decreed this. Why is she not blaming the king? No, she turns her accusation towards Haman. In other words, what she's doing here is rather than making the king her enemy, you did this, you're doing this, how can you do this? She's saying, he's doing this, he's doing, protect me, right? In other words, she's, rather than portraying the king as her foe, she's portraying him as her ally, as her protector. There's such a genius here, right? When we confront our men, how many times we make them into the enemy rather than making them into an ally against a common enemy, rather than rallying them to a vision. I have this vision for the relationship. What do you think? Should we do this? Let's work on this together. Let's both journey together towards this vision. No, we say, you're doing this and you're doing that, and I can't stand it, and I'm not going to stand for it, and so forth, right? So the brilliancy of Esther here is to make the king her ally and her protector, her partner in the journey to transformation, rather than her opponent, rather than her enemy and her foe. She's inviting the king into a journey together towards transformation. Rather than saying, you have to change, you did this, she's saying, let's together transform. Let's together change. Let's together journey together towards something better. This is so powerful, the way that she deviates the blame from the king himself. She's able, in other words, to distinguish between the king and his demon. Too often in a man or in a partner, they're merged. And so we see this dark, this terrible behavior. And we identify the man with the behavior. Esther here is saying, I see the man, and I distinguish the man from the behavior. I see you as my ally and my protector, my husband, my king. And this is the behavior that we can now partner against. Let us partner against this great evil. And so in this sense, she's able to see the king in his highest self. This is a penetrating vision. When she says to the king, Haman did this, she's basically seeing the king as her protector, as her ally. She is seeing everything that the king is in the depths of his being. Deep down, the king is a protector. Deep down, he is her ally. Deep down, he is generous. Deep down, he loves her. And she is, in a way, at this moment when she's shifting the blame to Haman and rallying the king to her cause, she is single-handedly revealing the king to himself. She's saying, this is who you truly are. This is who I see in you. Become this. I need it. I long for it. And so, as in that sense, Esther is almost prophetic. She's able to have a visionary. Her gaze is visionary. Her gaze is prophetic. Her gaze is seeing beyond the appearances to everything that the king could be. And this is why, by the way, in the Jewish tradition, she's classified as a prophet, along with 6 other women. Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther are all depicted as prophets. And one might wonder, well, how is Esther a prophet? I don't see her, prophesying and so forth. This is the prophetic moment when she's able to see past the cruelty, past the toxicity, past the machismo, to who the king truly is, and then speaking it forth. She says, this is who you are. This is who I long for you to become. But this is who you are, and I am speaking it forth with my words, with my attitude. At that moment, she is entering into the prophetic realm. This is a prophetic ability, by the way, that all of us women have. All of us are capable of seeing beyond appearances. We all know who our man truly is beneath all of the layers of narcissism, toxicity, and so forth. We can see who the man truly is, but too often we dismiss that vision. We're like, oh, I'm being delirious, right? Right now I'm being delusional. We think we're being delusional when actually we're being prophetic. What Queen Esther is teaching us is the power of that gaze. Let us never stop seeing what we see in the man, and let us never stop prophesying and bringing it forth. Because there's such power in truly seeing a man as who he truly is and as who he truly can become. This is not delusion, this is prophecy. And so, the story, of course, in this context, the king reacts very, very positively to all of these delicate tactical steps that Esther took. He reacts very powerfully. And he cannot, of course, overturn the decree. In Babylon, you cannot overturn a decree. But he allows Queen Esther to write a new decree where the Jews will be allowed to defend themselves. So at that moment, you have Queen Esther not only finding favor with the king, but rising to heights of unequal partnership and equality with the king. She is now reigning alongside the king. She's making her own decrees and shifting the course of history. And all of this because of these amazing, powerful steps that she took. The ability to die to her old self, the ability to take courageous sacrificial action, the ability to express, to be vulnerable about her desires, but in a way that is still humble. And finally, her prophetic vision of all that could be for the relationship, of all that the king was, truly is, and truly could become. These are the moments, I think, that as women we can glean. These are the beautiful secrets of Queen Esther, and in my view, the secret to her rise from rags to riches. This is the magic of Queen Esther, and it's a magic that we can also adopt as we follow in her footsteps. All right, this is the end of our beautiful journey through the mother's house. I hope that you enjoyed sitting at the table with me with these amazing women. I see it almost like having dinner with them and chatting and hearing their stories and then learning from them and perhaps applying some of these lessons in our own lives. But I really hope you enjoyed your stay, our hospitality, the feast that was given here in the presence of these women. And yes, and that you know that you will take some of this wisdom home with you and begin to experiment, explore with some of these teachings. So yes, please do feel free to go deeper by purchasing the book in the Mother's House. The book is available on Amazon, and it goes into much more detail, and it's very affordable. It's only I think $25. So I really invite you to go deeper with the book, and I will see you for the next series of lectures that I'm going to be doing. One on masculinity in the Bible, and the other one on the Song of Songs. So thank you so much for listening all the way to now. And I wish you all the best. And I wish you also to yourselves also begin journeying with these amazing women. We are not alone, guys. We are not alone. We have these amazing mothers to mother us and to guide us in our relationships. And I hope you will adopt some of these mothers for yourselves. Thank you.